15-second hook. The sparks flew in slow motion as Marcus watched Karen's Tesla charging port explode in a shower of blue electricity. 3 months of stolen power, 3 months of lies, 3 months of her smug smile as she drained his circuit, while he paid the bills. But as the acrid smoke cleared and Karen's scream pierced the night air, Marcus realized he'd made a terrible mistake, one that would cost him everything he'd worked to build. The needle on Marcus Chen's electric meter spun like a casino wheel, and he knew exactly why. Through his kitchen window, he could see the sleek white Tesla Model S plugged into what Karen Whitmore claimed was her half of the duplex's shared electrical circuit. The sight made his jaw clench as he stared at the latest utility bill, $847. For a month when he'd barely been home. That's it, he muttered, crushing the paper in his fist. Marcus had purchased the duplex 18 months ago as an investment property, living in the left unit while renting out the right to supplement his income as a software engineer. The mortgage was steep, but the plan was solid until Karen moved in 6 months ago with her pristine Tesla and her complete disregard for boundaries. The October morning air bit at his cheeks as he stepped onto the shared driveway. Karen's charging cable snaked across the concrete like a technological umbilical cord, drawing power from the outlet he'd installed for his own future electric vehicle. The outlet that was clearly on his side of the property line, the outlet that was connected to his electrical panel. "Morning, Marcus." Karen's voice rang out with that particular brand of cheerfulness that always set his teeth on edge. She emerged from her front door wearing yoga pants and a smile that never quite reached her eyes. "Beautiful day, isn't it? We need to talk." Marcus held up the electric bill. "This is the 3rd month in a row. My power usage has nearly doubled." Karen's expression shifted to practiced innocence. "Oh my, that does sound expensive. Have you considered switching to LED bulbs? I read they can really make a difference." "Cut the act, Karen. I know you're charging your Tesla on my circuit." "Your circuit?" She laughed. "A sound like wind chimes. In a hurricane, Marcus sweetie. We share this driveway. The outlet is right there in the middle. If anything, it's a shared resource." Marcus felt heat rising in his chest. "The outlet is connected to my electrical panel, my meter, my bill." "Well, that seems like poor planning on the landlord's part, doesn't it?" Karen's smile widened. "Maybe. You should have been more specific in the lease about electrical boundaries." The lease, Marcus had written it himself, trying to keep things simple and neighborly. He'd included utilities in Karen's rent, thinking it would be easier than splitting bills. The arrangement worked fine until she bought the Tesla and started treating his electrical system like her personal charging station. "You're stealing power," Marcus said, his voice steady despite the rage building inside him. "Stealing?" Karen placed a hand over her heart in mock offense. "That's a very serious accusation. I'm simply using the amenities available to me as a tenant. If you have an issue with the electrical setup, perhaps you should consult with an electrician." A car door slammed behind them. Their neighbor, Bill Morrison, emerged from his sedan with a toolbox, heading toward his garage. He glanced over at the brewing confrontation with the wary expression of someone who'd witnessed too many neighborly disputes. "Morning, Bill," Karen called out sweetly. Bill nodded curtly and disappeared into his garage, clearly wanting no part of whatever was unfolding. "Look," Marcus said, forcing himself to remain calm. "Let's figure this out reasonably. But Tesla charges at what, 50 amps? That's costing me over $200 a month just for your car." "I appreciate your concern about my vehicle," Karen replied, "but I'm not responsible for your poor financial planning. If you can't afford to live here, maybe you shouldn't have bought a duplex." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. Poor financial planning? He'd worked 60-hour weeks for 5 years to save for this down payment. He'd sacrificed vacations, dinners out, even a social life to build something stable. And now this woman, who drove a $90,000 car and wore a designer athleisure like a uniform, was lecturing him about money management while literally stealing his electricity. "I want you to stop using my outlet," Marcus said through gritted teeth. "And I want world peace and unlimited mimosas," Karen shot back. "We don't always get what we want, do we?" She unplugged her charging cable with deliberate slowness, coiling it like a snake. "I'll be back this evening to charge up for tomorrow. My Tesla and I have a very important meeting with a potential client. Some of us have real careers that require reliable transportation." The dig about his career stunk. Marcus worked remotely for a tech startup, which Karen had somehow twisted into meaning he wasn't a real professional, as if developing the software that powered half the apps on her phone was somehow less legitimate than her job in pharmaceutical sales. "Karen, I'm serious." "So am I." She turned toward her door, then paused. "Oh, and Marcus, you might want to call an electrician about that outlet. It's been making some concerning sparking sounds lately. Wouldn't want anyone to get hurt." The door closed with a soft click that somehow managed to sound like a gunshot. Marcus stood alone in the driveway, utility bill still crumpled in his hand. Watching the morning sun glint off Karen's Tesla, the car seemed to mock him with its silent, expensive presence. Everything about Karen mocked him: her casual dismissal of his concerns, her weaponized politeness, her complete inability to acknowledge that actions had consequences. He'd tried being reasonable, He'd tried being neighborly. He'd even considered just eating the cost to avoid conflict. But looking at that Tesla, gleaming white and pristine while his bank account hemorrhaged money, Marcus felt something cold and calculating settle in his chest. If Karen wanted to play games with electricity, he'd show her exactly what kind of games a software engineer could play. That evening, Marcus watched from his kitchen window as Karen returned home from work. She sat in her Tesla for several minutes, probably making phone calls or checking emails, before finally emerging with her designer handbag and a Starbucks cup that probably cost more than Marcus spent on groceries in a day. The routine was always the same. Karen would disappear inside for 30 minutes, enough time to change clothes, pour a glass of wine, and scroll through social media. Then she'd come back out to plug in her car for the night, letting it drink his power while she slept peacefully, secure in the knowledge that someone else was paying for her convenience. Marcus had spent the day researching electric vehicle charging systems, circuit protection, the precise amperage draw of a Tesla Model S, and most importantly, the legal definitions of electrical theft and property damage. What Karen was doing was stealing, plain and simple. In their state, theft of utilities was a misdemeanor that could result in fines and restitution. But proving it would require documentation, witnesses, maybe even legal fees that Marcus couldn't afford. The system was designed to protect people, like Karen, people with resources and time, and the casual cruelty to exploit others without consequence. But Marcus had other resources. 20 years of programming experience, a deep understanding of electrical systems from his engineering background, and a growing certainty that sometimes the only way to stop a bully was to speak their language. As predicted, Karen emerged 30 minutes later, wine glass in hand, moving toward her car with the lazy confidence of someone who'd never faced real consequences for their actions. Marcus stepped onto his porch. Karen, she turned, clearly annoyed at the interruption to her routine. What now, Marcus? I'm giving you one last chance. Stop using my electricity, or I'll take steps to protect my property. Karen's laugh was sharp and bitter. Protect your property? What are you going to do? Call the police? Tell them your mean tenant is using the outlet in the shared driveway. She plugged in her charging cable with exaggerated care. Good luck with that. I'm not going to call the police. Something in Marcus's tone made Karen pause. For the first time since he'd known her, she looked uncertain. Then what exactly are you threatening me with? Marcus met her gaze steadily. I'm not threatening anything. I'm making a promise. If you steal my power one more time, I'll make sure you regret it. Karen's uncertainty vanished, replaced by her familiar smugness. Oh, Marcus, you're really going to have to do better than empty threats. Some of us aren't intimidated by awkward software nerds having little tantrums. She turned and walked toward her door, calling over her shoulder, sweet dreams. Try not to cry too hard when you see your next electric bill. Marcus watched her disappear inside, then looked at the charging cable connecting her Tesla to his outlet, the cable that would pump 50 amps of his electricity into her car for the next 8 hours. The cable that represented everything wrong with people like Karen, the casual entitlement, the weaponized helplessness, the absolute certainty that actions had no consequences. He pulled out his phone and opened the Notes app, reviewing the electrical modifications he'd researched. It would take him about 2 hours to implement. The components would cost less than $50. And when Karen plugged in tomorrow night, she'd learn exactly what consequences felt like. As Marcus headed inside to gather his tools, he felt something he hadn't experienced in months. See? The ambulance sirens cut through the October night like banshees, their red and blue lights painting the duplex in hellish colors. Marcus stood frozen on his porch, watching paramedics work over Karen's convulsing body on the driveway. The acrid smell of burned electronics mixed with something worse than metallic scent of seared flesh. Sir, I need you to step back. A paramedic with kind eyes and blood on her gloves looked up at Marcus. Are you the homeowner? Marcus nodded, his throat too constricted to speak. Karen had stopped convulsing, but her breathing was shallow and erratic. One of her hands, the one that had been gripping the charging cable, was wrapped in gauze that was already seeping red. What happened here? The paramedic's voice was professional but urgent. The charging port? Marcus's words came out as fragments. There was an electrical surge. She was unplugging her car. It was technically true. Karen had been unplugging the charging cable when Marcus's modification activated. What he didn't mention was that she'd only been unplugging it because the Tesla's safety systems had detected the electrical anomaly and automatically shut down the charging process, triggering an alert on her phone. Electrical burns on the palm and fingers. The paramedic called to her partner. Possible cardiac arrhythmia. We need to get her to St. Mary's now. As they loaded Karen onto the stretcher, her eyes fluttered open. For a moment, they focused on Marcus with startling clarity. You, she whispered, her voice barely audible over the sirens. You did this. Then she was gone, disappearing into the ambulance like a ghost. The red lights faded into the distance, leaving Marcus alone with the smoking ruin of Karen's Tesla and the growing certainty that his life had just imploded. Excuse me, sir. Marcus turned to find a police officer approaching, young, serious, with a notepad already in his hand. Behind him, neighbors had begun emerging from their houses, drawn by the commotion. Bill Morrison stood at the edge of his driveway, his face grim. "I'm Officer Rodriguez. I understand you're the property owner." "Yes." Marcus's voice sounded foreign to his own ears. "Marcus Chen. I live in the left unit. Can you tell me what happened?" Marcus repeated his story about the electrical surge, each word feeling like a stone in his mouth. Officer Rodriguez wrote everything down with meticulous care, occasionally asking for clarification. "Had you been having electrical problems with the property?" the officer asked. The outlet had been drawing a lot of power lately. "My electric bills were really high." Again, technically true. "And Ms. Whitmore was your tenant?" "Yes. She rents the right unit." Officer Rodriguez looked at the charging cable, still connected to Marcus's outlet, its other end, a twisted mass of melted plastic and metal. "Whose charging station is this?" "It's connected to my electrical panel," Marcus said carefully. "But Karen had been using it for her car." "I see." The officer made another note. "We'll need to have the fire department's electrical inspector take a look at this. And someone from your insurance company will probably want to examine the scene as well." Insurance? Marcus felt another wave of nausea. His homeowner's policy would undoubtedly have investigators crawling all over the property. Investigators who might discover that the electrical surge hadn't been an accident. "Will she be okay?" Marcus asked. Officer Rodriguez closed his notepad. "I don't know, sir. Electrical injuries can be unpredictable. We'll know more once the doctors have a chance to examine her." After the police left, Marcus sat in his kitchen staring at the tools still scattered across his dining table. Wire strippers, electrical tape, the small relay component that had triggered the surge, evidence of his crime laid out like an indictment. He should dispose of everything immediately, clean up the evidence, and hope the investigators would conclude it was a tragic accident. But his hands refused to move. Every time he reached for the wire strippers, he saw Karen's eyes in the ambulance, heard her whispered accusation. "You did this." The knock on his door at 11:30 p.m. made Marcus jump. Through the peephole, he could see Bill Morrison holding a steaming mug. "Thought you might need this," Bill said when Marcus opened the door. He held out the coffee, black and strong. "Thanks." Marcus accepted the coffee gratefully. His hands were shaking, and the warmth felt like a lifeline. Bill glanced at the scorched driveway. "Hell of a thing, yeah. You know, I've been thinking about what I saw earlier today. You and Karen, arguing about the electric bill?" Marcus's blood turned to ice water. "What about it? She was stealing your power, wasn't she? For that fancy car of hers." Marcus said nothing, but Bill nodded as if he'd confirmed something. "Figured as much. I've been watching her routine for months. Every night, same time, plugging into your outlet. Never seemed right to me." Bill sipped his own coffee. "Course, what happened tonight? That's something else entirely." "It was an accident," Marcus said quickly. "Electrical surge. Old wiring, maybe." Bill studied Marcus's face in the porch light. "Maybe. But you know what? If I was a man being robbed blind by his tenant, and I had the kind of technical knowledge to do something about it, well, I might get creative too." Marcus's heart hammered so loud he was sure Bill could hear it. "Thing is," Bill continued, "I didn't see anything tonight except a terrible accident. Same as I didn't see anything all those months Karen was stealing your electricity. Sometimes a man's gotta mind his own business, you know?" The words hung between them like a lifeline. Bill was offering him an alibi, a witness who would testify that Marcus had been the victim of Karen's theft rather than the architect of her punishment. "I appreciate that," Marcus said carefully. "Karen Whitmore is a piece of work," Bill said. "The way she parked across my driveway last month, then acted like I was the problem when I asked her to move. The parties she throws on weeknights. That entitled attitude of hers." He shook his head. "Some people just push and push until something pushes back." After Bill left, Marcus sat in his kitchen, drinking coffee and staring at his phone. He should call someone, his insurance company, maybe a lawyer. But who did you call when you'd accidentally electrocuted your tenant while trying to protect yourself from theft? At 2:17 a.m., his phone rang. Unknown number. "Mr. Chen, this is Dr. Sarah Martinez, at St. Mary's Hospital. I'm calling about Karen Whitmore." Marcus's mouth went dry. "Is she ... "She's stable, but I need to ask you some questions about what happened. Ms. Whitmore has second and third degree electrical burns on her right hand and forearm. She also experienced cardiac arrhythmia that we were able to correct with medication. Will she recover? The burns will require skin grafts and extensive physical therapy. The cardiac episode could have long-term effects, but it's too early to tell. Mr. Chen, Ms. Whitmore claims that you deliberately caused this accident. She's asking us to call the police." Marcus felt the world tilt. That's not true. There was an electrical surge. She was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. "I see. Well, the police will want to speak with her once she's more coherent. In the meantime, you should know that she's hired a lawyer, someone named David Garrett." Marcus knew that name. David Garrett was the kind of personal injury attorney who advertised during daytime TV, promising to make insurance companies pay maximum damages, the kind who specialized in turning accidents into windfalls. "Thank you for calling, Dr. Martinez. Mr. Chen, for what it's worth, electrical accidents happen. Old wiring, power surges, equipment failures. The investigators will determine what really occurred. After hanging up, Marcus walked to his dining table and began putting away his tools. Each piece of equipment felt heavier than it should, weighted with the enormity of what he'd done. The wire strippers that had modified the circuit, the electrical tape that had hidden his work, the relay that had turned his anger into action. But as he worked, something Bill had said kept echoing in his mind. Some people just push and push until something pushes back. Karen had pushed. For months, she'd stolen his electricity, dismissed his concerns, and treated him like a servant whose only purpose was to subsidize her lifestyle. She'd weaponized her rental agreement and her victim status, secure in the knowledge that Marcus would never fight back because people like him never did, except he had fought back. And now she was in the hospital with burns that would scar her for life, facing medical bills that would dwarf even Marcus's inflated electric costs. The irony was almost poetic. Karen, who had spent months stealing power, had finally felt the full force of what electricity could do when wielded with intent. The very system she'd exploited had turned against her, delivering a lesson in consequences that no court or mediation could have provided. Marcus sealed his tools in their case and stored it in his closet. Tomorrow, investigators would swarm the property. They'd examine the outlet, the charging cable, the electrical panel. They'd interview neighbors and review utility records. And they'd try to determine whether Karen Whitmore had been the victim of a terrible accident or the target of calculated revenge. But tonight, for the first time in months, Marcus's electric meter was spinning at normal speed. Tonight, his power was his own again. And despite everything, the guilt, the fear, the legal storm that was surely coming, Marcus felt something he hadn't experienced since Karen moved in next door. He felt like he'd won. At 3:30 a.m., Marcus was startled awake by the sound of glass breaking. Detective Lisa Park had seen her share of domestic disputes turn deadly, but the Chun Whitmore case felt different from the moment she stepped onto the scorched driveway. The evidence told two competing stories, and after 18 years on the force, she'd learned that the truth usually lived somewhere in the messy space between them. Mr. Chen, I'm Detective Park. This is Detective Williams. We'd like to ask you some questions about last night's incident. Marcus invited them inside, his movements careful and controlled. Park noticed the slight tremor in his hands as he poured coffee, the way his eyes kept darting toward the dining room where tool marks on the table suggested recent electrical work. We've spoken with Ms. Whitmore at the hospital. Detective Williams began, settling into the worn leather chair across from Marcus. She's made some serious allegations. She's upset, Marcus said carefully. I understand that. What happened was terrible. Park pulled out her notepad. She claims you deliberately sabotaged the electrical outlet to cause her harm. Says you threatened her the night before. I told her to stop stealing my electricity. That's not a threat, that's a property owner protecting his investment. Stealing electricity? Williams raised an eyebrow. Marcus retrieved a folder from his kitchen counter, spreading utility bills across the coffee table like evidence in a trial. 6 months of documentation. My power usage doubled the month Karen bought her Tesla. Look at these numbers. September 2024, $312. October, $847. November, $923. Park studied the bills. The pattern was undeniably dramatic spike in electrical consumption that coincided perfectly with Karen's move-in dates. Did you discuss this with Ms. Whitmore? Multiple times? She claimed the outlet was in the shared driveway, so she had a right to use it. But it's connected to my electrical panel, my meter. I was subsidizing a $90,000 car for a tenant who was already paying below market rent. Detective Williams made notes. What about the threats she mentioned? I told her I'd take steps to protect my property. That's not a threat, that's a landlord explaining consequences. What kind of steps? Park pressed. Marcus hesitated, and in that pause, Park saw the crack in his story. I was going to install a locking cover on the outlet, maybe put up a fence, to clearly delineate the property line, but you didn't do either of those things. I didn't have time. The electrical surge happened before I could implement any security measures. Park glanced at Williams, who was studying the scorch marks on the driveway through the window. 20 years of partnership had taught them to read each other's thoughts, and right now they were both thinking the same thing. Marcus Chen was hiding something. Mr. Chen, we're going to need to examine your electrical panel and the outlet where the incident occurred. We'll also need to speak with your neighbors about what they witnessed. Of course, whatever you need. After the detectives left, Marcus called in sick to work and spent the morning watching investigators swarm his property. The fire department's electrical inspector photographed every inch of the outlet and charging station. Karen's insurance adjuster measured and documented the damage to her Tesla. And through it all, Marcus maintained his story about old wiring and tragic accidents, but his confidence cracked when Detective Park returned at 2 p.m. with a search warrant. We need to examine your personal tools and any materials you might have used for electrical work, she explained, her tone professional but firm. Marcus watched helplessly as they inventoried his tool collection, photographed the dining table, and bagged samples of electrical tape and wire. When they found the relay component, the small device that had triggered the surge, Park's expression sharpened. "This is an interesting piece of equipment, Mr. Chen. Not something most homeowners keep around. I do a lot of DIY projects." "Electronics? Hobby. What exactly does this component do?" Marcus's mouth went dry. "It's a switching relay, used in automation systems." "Automation systems," Park repeated, "like something that might trigger an electrical surge at a predetermined time?" "I wouldn't know. I've never used it for anything like that." But Park was already bagging the relay, and Marcus knew his carefully constructed story was beginning to unravel. That evening, the local news ran a story about the incident. Marcus watched from his couch as a perky reporter stood in front of his duplex, describing a shocking case of neighbor disputes turning dangerous. Karen Whitmore, a local pharmaceutical sales representative, remains in critical condition after suffering severe electrical burns, the reporter announced. Her attorney, David Garrett, claims this was no accident. The camera cut to Garrett, a silver-haired man in an expensive suit who looked like he'd stepped out of a billboard advertisement. "My client was the victim of a deliberate assault. Marcus Chen systematically terrorized Ms. Whitmore for months before finally attempting to seriously injure or kill her. We will be seeking full criminal prosecution and civil damages." Marcus's phone began ringing immediately. First, his boss, asking pointed questions about his sick day and whether he needed personal time to deal with legal issues. Then, his insurance company, informing him that his claim was under investigation and coverage might be denied if criminal activity was involved. But the call that truly frightened him came at 9:30 p.m. Marcus Chen. The voice was gravelly, unfamiliar. "Yes, you. Did good, kid? That bitch had it coming. I'm sorry. Who is this?" "Friend of a friend. Words getting around about what you did to that Tesla driving cunt. About time someone put entitled bitches like her in their place." Marcus hung up, his hands shaking. The story was spreading beyond the neighborhood, morphing into something he'd never intended. On social media, he discovered the incident was being framed as a victory for working-class homeowners against entitled gentrifiers. A Facebook group called Justice for Marcus Chen had already gained 847 members. The posts ranged from supportive to disturbing. Finally, someone fought back against these parasites. Karen Whitmore got exactly what she deserved. More landlords should protect their property like this. But the pro-Karen faction was equally vocal and far more organized. Her GoFundMe for medical expenses had raised $23,000 in 12 hours. A Twitter hashtag Justice for Karen was trending locally, with posts describing Marcus as a dangerous predator who weaponized electricity to attack a woman. Marcus realized he was no longer just facing criminal charges, he was at the center of a cultural war he'd never meant to start. The next morning brought Detective Park back to his door, this time with an arrest warrant. "Marcus Chen, you're under arrest for aggravated assault and reckless endangerment. You have the right to remain silent." As the handcuffs clicked around his wrists, Marcus saw Bill Morrison watching from his driveway. Their eyes met, and Bill gave an almost imperceptible nod, a reminder that he still had at least one ally in the neighborhood. The booking process was a blur of fingerprints and mugshots. But the moment that would haunt Marcus came during his phone call to a bail bondsman. Through the jail's reinforced window, he could see protesters gathering outside, two distinct groups separated by police barriers. On one side, supporters held signs reading "Free Marcus Chen" and "Property Rights Matter." On the other, Karen's advocates waved placards declaring jail, electric terrorist, and justice for Karen. Marcus's lawyer, a court-appointed attorney named Janet Rodriguez, arrived 3 hours later with grim news. "The prosecutor is pushing hard on this case," she explained as they sat in a cramped interview room. "Election year, high-profile incident, social media attention. They're treating this as domestic terrorism." "Domestic terrorism? I defended my property." "From their perspective, you built a weapon designed to cause serious bodily harm. The relay component is particularly damaging. It shows premeditation." Marcus slumped in his chair. "What are we looking at? If convicted on all charges, 8 to 12 years? But there's something else you need to know." Rodriguez slid a document across the table. "Karen Whitmore's civil suit. She's seeking $2 million in damages." The number hit Marcus like a physical blow. $2 million more money than he'd earn in a lifetime. Even if he avoided prison, the civil judgment would destroy him financially. "There is one option," Rodriguez continued. "Plea bargain. Plead guilty to reckless endangerment, serve 18 months, pay restitution for her medical bills. It's not ideal, but it keeps you out of prison and limits your financial exposure." 18 months for defending my own property? Marcus, I need you to understand something. This case isn't really about electricity theft anymore. It's about power, who has it, who deserves it, and what happens when someone without it tries to take it back. The jury won't see a homeowner protecting his investment. They'll see a man who nearly killed a woman over a power bill. That night, alone in his cell, Marcus stared at the concrete ceiling and wondered how defending himself had transformed him into the villain. Karen had stolen from him for months, dismissed his concerns, and treated him like a servant. But somehow, In the public narrative, she'd become the innocent victim, and he'd become the dangerous predator. The irony was bitter. For months, Karen had held all the power in their relationship, the power to steal his electricity, to ignore his complaints, to treat his property like her personal charging station. She'd wielded that power with casual cruelty, secure in the knowledge that people. The revelation about Karen's history should have felt like vindication. But as Marcus sat in the county jail's visiting room, he realized it might be too late to matter. Janet Rodriguez spread the documents across the metal table like tarot cards, revealing a dark future. Portland, Oregon, 2019, Rodriguez read from the files. Karen rented a basement apartment, complained about electrical issues, then suffered accidental burns from a faulty outlet. Settlement, $180,000. Phoenix, Arizona, 2021. Same pattern: utility disputes with her landlord, then an electrical fire that damaged her belongings and caused minor injuries. Settlement, $320,000. Marcus studied Karen's previous addresses, rental agreements, and medical records. The pattern was undeniably and brilliant in its simplicity. Karen would target small-time landlords, create electrical disputes, then engineer situations that resulted in her injury and their liability. But this time was different, Marcus said slowly. This time, I actually modified the circuit, which makes you look guilty as hell, Rodriguez confirmed. Even if we can prove she was running a con, you still intentionally caused her injuries. The prosecutor will argue that two wrongs don't make a right. Outside the jail's windows, Marcus could see the protesters had grown larger and more organized. The pro-Karen faction now included representatives from 3 domestic violence organizations and a feminist advocacy group. Their signs had evolved too. Men who weaponize technology against women must face justice, and electrical violence is still violence. There's something else, Rodriguez continued, lowering her voice. I've been in contact with Karen's previous landlords. They're willing to testify about her pattern of behavior. But Marcus, they're also terrified. 2 of them received death threats after refusing to pay her settlement demands. The weight of that information settled over Marcus like a shroud. Karen wasn't just a scam artist, she was dangerous. And now he'd given her the perfect weapon to destroy him completely. What about the relay component? Marcus asked. Can we prove it malfunctioned accidentally? Rodriguez shook her head. The electrical inspector's report came back. Your modification was precise, targeted, and designed to activate at peak charging load. There's no way to spin this as an accident. Marcus closed his eyes, seeing his life crumbling in real time. His job was already gone. The tech startup had fired him the moment his arrest made the news. His duplex would have to be sold to pay legal fees. And even if he avoided prison, civil suit would leave him financially ruined for decades. There is one option, Rodriguez said carefully. A very dangerous option. What? We go on the offensive. Instead of defending your actions, we expose Karen's entire operation. Make this about her crimes, not yours. But Marcus, if we do this, there's no going back. Karen's legal team will destroy you in the media. They'll paint you as a violent misogynist trying to silence his victim. It will get ugly. Marcus thought about the months of stolen electricity, the condescending smiles, the casual cruelty of someone who saw him as nothing more than a mark to be exploited. Then he thought about the other landlords Karen had victimized: small business owners and retirees who'd worked their entire lives to build something, only to have it stripped away by a predator who weaponized the legal system. Do it, he said. The press conference was scheduled for the next morning, but word leaked early. By midnight, both camps of protesters had swelled to nearly 300 people each. The police had set up barricades and called in reinforcements, treating the situation like a potential riot. Marcus watched the chaos from his cell window, marveling at how quickly a simple dispute over utility bills had morphed into a cultural flashpoint. On social media, the hashtags #JusticeForKaren and #FreeMarcus were trending nationally, with celebrity endorsements on both sides. A prominent actress had tweeted, "Karen Whitmore represents every woman who's been terrorized by male violence. We stand with you, sister." A tech billionaire had responded, "Marcus Chen is a property owner defending himself against theft. Since when is protecting your investment a crime?" But at 3:17 a.m., everything changed. Marcus was awakened by commotion. In the hallway, guards running, radios crackling, the controlled chaos that meant something serious had happened. 20 minutes later, Janet Rodriguez arrived with Detective Park and a man Marcus didn't recognize. "This is Agent Sullivan from the FBI's white-collar crime division," Rodriguez explained. "There's been a development." Agent Sullivan slid a photograph across the table. It showed Karen leaving a motel room, her supposedly injured hand working perfectly as she carried a suitcase. "This was taken yesterday morning, 8 hours before she was supposed to be in the hospital for surgery," Sullivan said. "We've been investigating Ms. Whitmore for insurance fraud, and your case gave us the probable cause we needed for surveillance." Marcus stared at the photo. Karen's hand, the one that was supposed to require skin grafts and months of physical therapy, showed no signs of injury. No bandages, no swelling, no visible scarring. The medical records were falsified, Detective Park added. Karen bribed a nurse to create fake documentation of severe burns. Her actual injuries were minor first-degree burns that healed within days. The room spun around Marcus. She's been lying about everything. Gets better. Sullivan continued. We found her Operation Centaur storage unit filled with medical supplies, fake injury documentation, and detailed profiles of dozens of potential targets. Small landlords, elderly property owners, anyone who might be vulnerable to a civil suit. He spread more photographs across the table. Marcus saw fake medical braces, theatrical makeup for creating injury effects, and most damning of all, a detailed timeline of Karen's plan to manipulate him into providing grounds for her biggest payday yet. She researched you for months before moving in, Sullivan explained. Your employment history, financial situation, personality profile, she knew exactly how to push you toward desperate action. Rodriguez leaned forward. Marcus, this changes everything. You're not the perpetrator anymore, you're a victim of an elaborate fraud scheme. But even as relief flooded through him, Marcus felt a chill of realization. If Karen was running a con, and she knows you've discovered it, ... His phone returned with his personal effects, buzzed with a text message, unknown number. You think you've won, but you have no idea what's coming. Some mistakes can't be undone. Agent Sullivan's expression darkened as he read the message. We need to move fast. Karen's lawyers just filed a motion to have her released on her own recognizance pending trial. If she runs, she won't run, Detective Park said grimly. She's got too much invested in this particular game, but that doesn't mean she won't escalate. As if summoned by her words, an explosion shook the jail building. Car alarms wailed outside, and through the window, Marcus could see flames rising. From the direction of his duplex, Agent Sullivan was already on his radio. We need fire and rescue units at 1247 Maple Street. Possible arson. Marcus pressed his face to the window, watching orange light paint the night sky. His home, his investment, his future, everything he'd worked to build was burning. And he knew, with absolute certainty, that Karen Whitmore had lit the match. The irony was perfect in its cruelty. Marcus had spent months being victimized by Karen's theft, then been criminalized for defending himself. And now, just as the truth was coming to light, she'd escalated to outright destruction of his property. How long before we can get to the scene? Marcus asked. You're not going anywhere, Sullivan replied. If Karen's willing to commit arson, she might be willing to do worse. You're safer here until we can arrest her. But as the flames grew higher, and the protesters outside grew more agitated, Marcus realized that safety was an illusion. Karen had spent months studying him, manipulating him, and positioning him for her con. She knew his weaknesses, his triggers, and his breaking points. And now that her carefully constructed fraud was collapsing, she had nothing left to lose. The game between Marcus and Karen had started with stolen electricity and escalated through assault charges and civil lawsuits. But as he watched his life's work burn in the distance, Marcus understood that they'd entered the final phase where one of them wouldn't survive. 3 hours later, the fire was out, but Marcus's duplex was uninhabitable. The electrical system had been deliberately sabotaged, causing an overload that ignited the walls. Karen's unit had suffered minimal damage, while Marcus's side was completely destroyed. Professional job, the fire inspector told Agent Sullivan. Whoever did this knew exactly how to make it look like an electrical accident while ensuring maximum damage to the owner's property. Detective Park arrived with updates that painted an even grimmer picture. Karen's gone, checked out of the hospital against medical advice, disappeared from her motel. Her lawyers claim they have no idea where she is. Security footage conveniently corrupted. But we did find this at the scene. Park showed them a small electronic device identical to the relay component that had triggered Marcus's original modification. She left it right next to the electrical panel. A calling card. Marcus stared at the device, understanding flooding through him. Karen hadn't just been running a con, she'd been conducting a masterclass in psychological warfare. Every move had been calculated to push him toward exactly the kind of desperate action